Well, hey everyone, good afternoon. Thank you so much for joining. This is the quarterly public CAA convening or meeting series. This series is designed specifically for community action agencies that are part of their local government. And today's session, we are focusing on leveraging user research. And we are so excited that we have partnered with US Digital Response and Stig from US Digital Response, who has agreed to come and talk to us and share his expertise about user research and how you can use it in your agencies to help improve the services that you offer. So guys, you know me, I'm Mary Beth Schneber-Remrev. I'm the Director of Organizational Capacity Building here at the National Community Action Partnership. For those of you who don't know me, I spent a number of years at a local public community action agency as well, so I know and understand some of the challenges that public CAPs face, and really appreciate this time that we have to come together and talk as a group about the challenges we're seeing, the opportunities we have, and really share some peer advice. These calls are meant to be interactive. We're in meeting format because we'd love to see you. You can turn on your cameras. You have the ability to unmute yourself, put things in the chat. All paths are valid here. And this is really meant to be interactive. So just want to encourage you to be fully present and share your perspective and what you're thinking about as we go. Before we get too deep, want to make sure that we ground ourselves in our promise of community action, as we always do. And that promise reads that community action changes people's lives, embodies the spirit of hope, improves communities, and makes America a better place to live. We care about the entire community, and we are dedicated to helping people help themselves and each other. And I would say user research is one of the ways that we can live into this promise. This is one tool that we can put in our toolbox to help us care about the community and help people help themselves and each other. So I mentioned that we're really focusing on user research today, and how this aligns with community action. Like, you might be hearing user research and thinking of I don't know, like lab research or something like that. And that's really not what we're talking about here with user research. What we're talking about is, how do we take the insights of the customers and the people that we serve to inform the design of services and approaches that we use to get the maximum benefit out of them and to make them the most user-friendly for the people that we serve. User research is a tool that allows you to do that. It's one method or approach that you can use to garner that insight so that you can inform your approach and practices. User research really aligns deeply with our values as a community action agency, where we respect that the people who use the services or those who are closest to needing the services are often the ones who are best informed about how to create a solution. They are best informed about their needs. And so user research, again, is a different tool that we can use to engage with folks exactly in that expert space. So it is applicable to us in community action as we seek to design our services for the people and families we serve, but it also is relevant if you have subrecipients. Those are your customers too, right? And this principle and idea can apply to how you approach your subrecipient processes and interactions. It could also be helpful for kind of your public presence at large, and even for internal customers and any of the processes that you have to manage internally in your community action agency. So that is why we are talking about user research. Before we get started, before I turn it over to Stig, I want to encourage everyone to maybe put in the chat and say hello, say who you are, what agency you're with, and we'd love to know if you have a particular question about user research. We'd love to know that. If you would put that into the chat for us so that we could try to address that as we go today. So Stig, should I pass over to you?
All right, sounds good. I will start sharing screen. All right, there we go. I guess everyone is saying where they're from. So I guess I'll do the same and give a little background. I'm Stig Parfrey. I'm with US Digital Response, and I am our research operations lead. So my job kind of entails managing a lot of our research engagements. I'll say what research engagements are a little bit, but it's managing research projects and kind of scaling how we conduct and do user research. And one of my focuses is around coming up with the tools and processes and guidelines to help government partners conduct their own user research and scale it. And then I don't know how many of you know about USDR or not. There we go. So I'm just going to give a quick overview of kind of what USDR is and what we do and how I fit into that. So USDR is a nonprofit that takes volunteers, primarily tech volunteers, and uses them to help support governments who have projects they need help with. So if it's technical, one of the focuses is user research, but it can be programming, it can be design, kind of any different elements that the governments may have. We can kind of jump in and help support those projects and get them delivered. And this is all pro bono support to the government. So it's putting in a request on our site, and we'll jump in a call and figure out if it's a good kind of project and how we can best support, and start doing that. Yeah, so I mean, Mary Beth kind of went into the value of user research there a little there, but a big part of government is being accountable for designing and delivering services, and those services are for the people. User research is primarily about listening to and building the products and services you have around those people. Yeah, so it's the actual experience of people. It's the discipline about learning about user behaviors, their needs, their motivations, and this is done by talking to them, watching how they interact with products or services, and using other data-driven strategies that I'll go into in a little bit. And then one thing I forgot to mention as well, this is a kind of overview of user research. So some of this may be basic concepts to you, some of it might be new, but if you have experience doing research yourself, questions around where it would be applicable, anything that kind of comes to mind throughout this talk, please interrupt. I would appreciate to be interrupted as much as possible. So if you don't interrupt, I'll be very disappointed. And yeah, that can be either in the chat or you can come off mute and say something. Yeah, so why conduct user research? I think a lot of times you can be building a product or a service and you have a good idea of what it should look like, what it should feel like, what kind of the end goals are. But within that, it's very easy to make assumptions and have kind of small breakdowns or have just small usability issues that wouldn't be intuitive to you as someone who is an expert in the field. And kind of within that as well, it helps you build empathy and understanding to actually talk to the people you're serving and working with, hearing directly from them. And then on like a fundamental level, it means when you go and launch the service or product, you're not going to have to go back and do as many iterations and kind of fix the things that went wrong, because hopefully you'll have uncovered a lot of them. And this little chart here just kind of shows how with only talking to 5 people and like testing a service, you can uncover about 85% usability issues. So for a small amount of work and only talking to a few people, you can really make a huge impact on like the quality of the deliverables that you're kind of putting out there. I feel like this is a good slide for questions. Did any come in? Okay,
No
not yet.
questions yet.
Yeah, so I feel like I put this GIF in here because I kind of think it illustrates a feeling we've probably all had as people who have to deliver some kind of service or product, where you write the instructions or guidelines of the process, and it's all incredibly simple, and there's no kind of possible way you can think about how this could actually go wrong. And then it does go wrong, and you're kind of flummoxed. You're like, how would anyone possibly think to do it that way? But this is kind of where user research comes in. It kind of puts you, lets you see the perspective of other people and helps you understand kind of what level of coherence understanding they're coming into those same problems with you. Yeah. So if you are thinking about engaging in user research, it might be kind of when does it make sense to engage in user research with your products or your services? And in reality, you can kind of engage in research whenever, wherever you are in the process. In the beginning, it can kind of help you understand the roots of an issue, users' pain points, the goals and needs. We're going to go into a little case study later, but sometimes there's kind of small intuitive things that might not initially come to mind. And this can be a chance to start maybe changing the scope of your project and goal to encompass the issues you might not have necessarily thought of. Midway through the project, it's a great way to kind of test your theories. If you start building a product, you want to engage with people as you have that first prototype, you have those initial solutions and kind of see if it kind of meets those needs, if people comprehend it, if it's the right solution. And then kind of at the end, kind of thinking in an agile way, once you deliver a service or a product, it's not over. There's always going to be changes. There's going to be updates. The issues are going to be uncovered no matter what. And doing user research is a great way to get additional feedback, see those changes, and kind of figure out what needs to be done to make it effective in the long run. And within all these different kind of phases, there's a range of different research methodologies you can do. Kind of go into detail on a couple of those here. Yeah. So I think the most basic element of user research is interviewing. And this is just one-on-one talking to someone. And this can be a kind of generative interview where you're just talking through ideas or concepts, like the idea of a service, kind of what are someone's needs, and just listening to them and figuring out what they want. But you can also do interviews, again, with your particular product in mind, or actually showing them examples of what it is you're building. Surveys, I feel like this is the default way to get user feedback and is definitely a kind of robust tool for helping understand and get feedback. There's a lot of details and nuances in surveys, so you're making sure that you're actually truly getting people's real feedback and not necessarily the feedback that you've tailored the presentation to or the survey to. So kind of an example of this is if you write a yes or no question in a survey, people are always going to tend towards the positive. And if you ask, do you need this? People will tend to say yes, no matter whether they do or not, because people always think in addition to something is valuable. So kind of when you do write surveys, it's good to have like an open text option, or like you have people rate like, oh, out of these different options, which would be most valuable to you. But it is a very powerful tool there. And then usability tests. This is, again, watching someone walk through your product or service and kind of test it out and give you direct feedback so you can actually see how they're interacting and how they're using it. Any questions so far?
No questions, but I'll share, Stig. When I worked at a local agency, we were standing up a new centralized intake process, and it was really interesting. We had created this platform, if you will, to gather, client data. And one of the things that we did during the design was, rather than just like building, the platform and then launching it, we actually had people go into the platform, and we gave them specific tasks to do within the platform, and we recorded their screens as they were doing it. And that helped us to understand how we might need to change up like where different icons were, or what things were called, because it was interesting to us. The instructions were clear, right? We asked you to create a case, but somebody else would go, up into, case history instead of create a case. And it had a lot to do with, how things were labeled, or just how people naturally wanted to use the system. And so that saved us so much time by doing that. Because we got the input on the front end. We kind of knew what people were expecting in that system, and it made a stronger product at the end. So I just wanted to share that experience that I had. I don't know if anyone else has an experience with like interviews, surveys, or if you've ever done any of those usability tests that you'd be willing to share.
And that is an awesome example of a usability test.
Oh, hey, Lawrence.
Yeah, I can share. And I posted a little teaser in the chat. I've encountered this usability kind of issue with some of the online training components that we're pulling together. And we recognize that there's a digital divide and we're trying to appeal to the largest audience as possible. So we find out where the limitations are of that delivery method. So that's something that we've learned. It also causes us to go back and iterate on the e-courses that we put together, so that they're more navigable for folks that are need to be able to navigate those things.
Awesome. Actually, it might be good maybe if everyone be able to write in chat or say out loud, have they actually done any of these techniques before? I will go through some more as well. It would just be interesting to see kind of, maybe you've done it formally, or maybe you've just thought, it makes intuitive sense. I'm going to talk to the people who are going to be using my product or service. And that was, has anyone ever used any of these methodologies in the chat?
Maybe while folks are putting that into the chat, I just want to pick up, Lawrence, on a point that you made about the digital divide. And I think that's something really relevant as we're designing our services for our customers in particular, who have all different comfort levels or all different levels of experience using technology in particular, right? And so anytime that we're doing these kind of technology projects, a usability test is just a really good idea. It takes a little bit of extra time on the front end, but on the back end, it saves you time. And it doesn't just save you time, it saves the frustrations of your customers, which is worth its weight in gold. Stig, you probably see some comments coming into the chat. So Sarah said, yes, observing the customers interacting on the platform and be able to talk through each part together. We're currently considering a redesign, so this research stage is so important. Anything you want to add to that, Stig? Any insights from your perspective?
I mean, that's awesome. I feel like that's exactly what you should be doing.
Yeah. Rebecca said, we've done listening sessions with our nonprofit providers, our customers, we don't do direct services. Oh, right. So you're an agency who doesn't have direct services to customers. You provide services to the nonprofit agencies in your community. So great clarification, great context, Rebecca. But you were saying we've done listening sessions with our nonprofit providers and surveys to those providers, along with surveys in the community as part of the CNA process. And Stig, the CNA process is the community needs assessment process, which is part of what all community action agencies do to understand the local conditions in their communities.
Thank you. That's good context.
Yeah.
Are those CNA processes surveys?
They include surveys, but it also typically includes surveys, gathering input from stakeholders, customer focus groups, stakeholder focus groups, as well as pairing that with available community data. So, yeah.
Looks like.
Go ahead.
Oh, we've got a ton of people doing surveys and like listening sessions and interviews, which is great. Actually, then a follow-up question is, how did you all learn to do these? Or are you learning on the fly, or kind of what's the structure everyone is using? Learning on the fly. That is a good way to do it. That is how I initially learned about user research as well. That does sound like a good idea. Do you have like a shared resource hub where you kind of share the different kind of techniques or tools or resources you're using? Because there's definitely a lot of great resources around like user research and tips around avoiding bias and leading questions and things that could be super useful when you're starting to run your own sessions.
Yeah, so guys, if you have tools that you've used, the partnership, I would say we're always shopping for resources to put into our library because people ask these questions all the time. My inbox is full of, hey, how do agencies do this? Or hey, how do agencies do that? We try to showcase those on the partnership website. We also showcase them in training and technical assistance. We also have our online learning management system, and we can absolutely put tools and resources on there as well. But we can only put them on there if you send them. So would love to see what you're doing, what you're loving, what's working to build out that resource library for each other.
I would also be super interested in seeing that resource library as well, maybe adding to it where I could. But yeah, I'll jump into some of the less common methodologies. One is diary studies. This is like a longitudinal collection of data about behaviors. So usually what this looks like would be a survey or interview over a longer period of time, usually hopefully trying to like engage people when they're doing the action. So an example might be for like a grocery store would be interview a particular person each time they go to the store and get their feedback and perspective over a longer period of time, understanding why they're coming at different points in time. And you can do that within like a survey process, but it kind of gives you an idea of like the full perspective of someone, because a one-up interview or one-up survey is going to capture a moment in time for that person, but it's not going to necessarily have the entire picture of their experience. So that's where something valuable like a diary study comes in. In a kind of similar vein, there is ethnography, which is field research. And this is mainly kind of where you're following someone for a day in the life. So maybe you're shadowing someone through work or through their kind of experience engaging in trying to use a different service. So you're kind of shadowing them through their daily life to get a better understanding of what would apply to them and how best to serve them. And then there's card sorts. And I feel like this is one of the lesser known ones, but is actually super valuable for nearly everyone, especially if you're designing any kind of survey service or working with folks. And this is having participants organize topics into categories that make sense for them. So kind of a good example is if you're building a website and you have different like buckets and different segments of information within that, and you want to figure out how people are going to think about it and what they need, you can create different cards with kind of like the overall buckets, and then have the individual like topic areas or information within that. And you get people lay this out on a table and actually just get people to go through and say, okay, this is the big bucket. I think it should be a header. This is the information that should go underneath it. And you can do this with a bunch of people and kind of figure out how they think about the information you want to present and make sure it's like intuitive for them. And even if you're like doing an internal process for yourself, like something like this goes a long way, because not everyone thinks about things in the same way. And it gives you kind of a good fundamental understanding of how to structure information, which I think comes up a lot, at least in my line of work. Yeah, so that was the kind of overview of user research. There is a lot in user research, but like in its baseline level, it is simple. It's trying to understand people, where they are, and kind of what they're doing in the most kind of human way possible. There is a lot of like details and methodologies around making sure you're getting the best information, you're kind of understanding people, you're not leading them, or you're not being biased. But yeah, and there's great resources online. Maybe we can share some of that out after this when it comes to that. But this next section is kind of a case study of the application of user research in the city of Seattle. And I am actually in Seattle City City Hall right now, actually, for another talk that's happening after this. But yeah, I'll kind of just jump into this and kind of give an overview of kind of how research can be used and kind of what the end goals and products coming from it can look like. But before I do that, any questions on the other content or thoughts?
I just see a comment in the chat from Brandy that success stories that roll upon more of the diary study with holding that info on how that affected the client personally. So I think you're saying success stories can be one way to kind of help you understand how programs have impacted people. Success stories are great, Brandy, and I think that they're a different kind of user research in some ways, because it's happening after the product has been developed, where in this case, some of the user research that we're trying to do, we're trying to gather it before we get to the end of the service. Is that right, Stig? Or do you want to add to that?
Yeah, I mean, again, it can go through all phases. So like definitely in the beginning, it's great to get that into context. But at the end, I mean, those user stories like of success can tell a powerful story in their own right. And it can be a way to kind of help influence folks. And one thing I didn't touch on too much throughout this, like user research is evidence. And if you have an idea and a proposal, it's a lot stronger a case if you can show kind of individuals and their needs and examples of it. Like just putting a quote of someone being like, oh, I'm really frustrated, I can't like figure this out, is a great way of telling a story and kind of pushing a particular goal in mind, especially when it might not otherwise be heard. All right, so applying user research in the city of Seattle. Yeah, so Seattle is a fairly expensive city, and Seattle offers about 30 plus different programs to kind of help make city life a little more affordable. And the basic living cost for a family of four with two parents, two kids is about $87K. And a lot of that can actually be subsidized through the different programs, but they are not particularly easy to find or apply for. So this Affordable Seattle research project was around kind of figuring out ways to decrease the cost of living in Seattle for residents, and then making it a little easier for residents to find and apply for the benefits that are available. So this initially started with user interviews, so in-person observations, talking to city staff. And in the process of kind of these interviews and talking to city staff, there is a ton of handwritten resources and like knowledge passed among staff around these different programs, because there is no necessarily, well, there was no necessarily centralized resources around kind of what these programs are, who could apply for them, what the criteria were across the city. Yeah. So kind of with that knowledge in mind, the team put together this prototype, Affordable Seattle, which is a way for people to kind of search through and see what programs are available. They can put in basic information around their kind of demographics. And with this, they can hopefully figure out what programs they can apply for and are valuable to them. And this prototype was kind of tested a couple of times with folks to kind of figure out what the basic information people needed. So it may be only a very few kind of criteria there. It's number of people in household, income, and zip code. But kind of that's the baseline information that gets people interested. They can then see what programs might be available to them and then kind of further delve into the information and criteria from there. And that came through doing those interviews and talking to different folks. And kind of here's a little video prototype of what it looks like to navigate on the app. And then one thing the team also found out from engaging in this process is that a lot of folks are just using this on the app. They're not necessarily going to have computers and desktop computers where they're searching through this. So it's very important that the experience is something that they can actually engage with completely on mobile. Yeah. So another kind of big learning that came from this is the kind of huge second part of this is once the team started talking to community organizations and residents, they found that a lot of folks didn't know the passwords and the details to their accounts. So all these different programs are different services. So you may be able to find them and start applying, but each of them is going to have a different login page, different information you need, which means there isn't really a kind of a consistent way of applying, which ended up being very confusing. And then talking to different community organizations, a lot of them ended up just having pages of like passwords and information and emails for different residents to help them kind of figure out how to apply and apply for them, because there's just so much to manage. And kind of, so from that, the idea came to put together this thing called Civ Form, which is a way of having one login for all these different programs across the city of Seattle. And I think kind of this is where you can kind of see the big value in user research. Because if you came into it, I think it's like relatively intuitive to know that having one place where you can find all the benefits that apply to you, this kind of in somewhat is common sense, but it's good to validate and make sure that's something people need. And it's good to see the observations of the city staff seeing that it is so disparate. And that's the evidence to actually get people engaged and have enough effort and budget be put forward to actually make this site and centralize these resources. But then from actually talking to the community organizations and the folks on the ground, you realize that isn't the only problem. It is the application side, managing these passwords, managing these programs. And this is where something like CiviForm came into being by kind of hearing those perspectives and that evidence. And so with CiviForm now, people are able to use this one app and one central thing to apply to all the different programs across the city of Seattle. All right. Yeah, but this again wasn't even the final version. A lot of what Civiform is kind of came around through doing different workshops and community-based listening sessions with the different organizations that help people apply to these benefits, the city staff, and kind of iterating, refining, and figuring out exactly what the details are going to be of kind of the dashboards, how people view it. And like, there is always two sides to every coin. There's the applicant side, but then there's also the city side and the information they need. So kind of working with both sides and figuring out exactly what they're going to need from the service. So it kind of comes together to be something that everyone can use. And this is all live as well right now. So if you wanted to, you can go on the Seattle City website and kind of look through what this site and process looks like.
Big a process question on that last slide, total geek question. What tool were you using, or did they use to like?
Oh yeah, this one right here, this is called Mural, which is an online whiteboard. There's a couple other ones. There's Mural, Miro, and FigJam. All of them have free trials if you want to give it a go, but it's an easy way to kind of collaborate and start doing these kind of workshops online. Yeah. Any other questions here? We're coming to the end. All right, but lessons learned from the Seattle Civiform project is meet people where they are. This means like going and engaging with the community organizations, the city staff, and the different resident applicants, and kind of hearing their perspectives, seeing the processes they were doing, like actually watching someone go through the process of trying to have someone apply for benefits is a very enlightening thing, because then you see all the little details of things they have to remember, their documentation, and kind of that what helps inform what you need to build and where the gaps are. The human intermediaries part is, if you're doing research, it's often hard to get access to the people you want to talk to directly. So it is worth like having those organizations and groups who can put you in contact with the end users. Yeah. And then digital solutions benefit those who already have access to the web and are in a language they understand. It's a relatively intuitive one, but not everyone is going to be online. So kind of going through this process, you realize the tools you have to build are going to have to be for, again, those residents, but also the people who are there working with the residents and applying for them, because not everyone is going to have access to a computer or phone or necessarily the language capabilities to do it themselves. There we go. Questions?
I think it was really cool to see an example of how an agency, a public agency, not a community action agency, but similar to a community action agency, right? Similar structure to a lot of us actually used user research to help inform their approach. I like seeing that live and up close.
Yeah, and then, I mean, it might make more, well, like USDR does a lot of these projects in similar ways. So like right now we're working on helping conduct user research on a redesign of a like housing application site where people get housing credits and vouchers, and kind of what that process looks like. But it's designed in such a way that everyone on the housing side understands it, and it was them who built it. But it turns out a lot of the residents and applicants don't necessarily comprehend the language or the terminology or the abbreviations that someone on that side would use. So there's like a lot of impact you can have with a little research just by kind of figuring out how people think about these problems and questions and applying it.
Big, how long did that process take? Do you know?
The Citify one was definitely a longer term project because it became actually building the product as well. And with that, there's like iteration and testing as get launched. So I think that was a little under a year. But user research can be a lot quicker as well. Like a USDR standard engagement is 10 to 12 weeks. It just really depends on kind of how far you're going and where in the process you are. Like small site changes can be done very quickly, and like content and maybe processes or updating surveys. But if you're building an entire new product, the research will kind of go hand in hand with that throughout the entire process.
Cool. That's helpful to kind of know and understand. Guys, what questions do you have? I don't want to hog all the questions.
It would be great to hear some of kind of your stories around user research, or just funny stories of like maybe things not being intuitive as you initially thought when building a product or service. I feel like there's always those great examples of, a pull door that or push door that has a handle, or a little path that someone walks through the wrong way because it's not necessarily designed with people in mind.
I've got a question for you.
Yep.
We've seen a lot of different methodologies for gaining feedback from consumers. I wonder, it's kind of two-part, if you have the capacity to implement this in a planning process, how might you approach, what you select to do along the way, when you've got, say, a year-long program that you're looking at. And if you don't do that in the front end, what are some ways of engaging that process mid-flow?
Yeah, that's a very good question and very well put. Yeah, I mean, initially, you want to engage in like the planning process with hopefully generative research if you have that time. And that kind of is the idea setting phase where you're talking to people in a very open way and just understanding the greater context in the area. So I'll say we're doing the example around like housing. It would be talking to someone who has either gone through the process or is in the process of looking for housing, and instead of specifically asking them like, oh, if you're applying for vouchers, like what would you expect? But just saying like, what are your experiences around housing, and kind of listening to what they've tried to do in the past, different avenues they've gone through, and getting a greater picture of what the entire process looks like. And I think from that, you kind of get ideas beyond what you might have initially thought of. So maybe it turns out like their first port of call was, looking on Craigslist for cheap housing or something like that. And knowing that like when people are initially looking, they don't know where to go. They're not going to go to a government site initially. And that's not the first thing that comes to mind. And you can start maybe putting that in a solution. Maybe it turns out marketing is part of your plan. So kind of early on, it's that very open questions and talking to the end user as much as possible. If you are focusing on like a specific subsection section of people, doing that ethnographic and field research and following the people through their kind of daily lives or jobs, depending on the focus, I think that's a great way initially. And then if you've missed out on that point and you're kind of midway through the project, I think going to like standard user interviews around the area that you're working on and helping validate your initial plan, I think is kind of a good way to go. And getting the information and then seeing if there's anything you might have missed within that. If you have like an initial solution, that's a chance to prototype and iterate on what you've already put out there.
I think there's a lot of love for you in the chat, people really appreciating the information and the thoroughness of your presentation. Other questions, guys? Have any of you ever used user research? Have you ever done this yourself, like a true user research process? If you did, what did you learn, or what advice would you have for your peers? Let's see if anyone wants to share their experience. We did this at the state level when I worked at the state office for our SNAP employment and training program. We contracted a human-centered design firm to help us look at how we could improve our SNAP employment and training program and make it more usable. And it was just so fascinating. Like, it was so fascinating to kind of see how like the differences between how we thought about the program and how practitioners and people in the state office thought about the program, and then how that was received by customers, and just some of the suggestions that we got out of really taking the time to deeply dive into what our customers needed. It really improved the program tenfold. So I guess my advice would just be, give things time, right? Give the proper time to do the research, and don't rush it either, right? Don't underestimate kind of that value.
Yeah. And I think it's kind of was mentioned in the presentation, but user research can save you a lot of time in the long run. Like, I think that point of like just talking to 5 people can solve like 80% of kind of the unknown issues that are going to come up. That does come primarily from tech, but I think it applies to everywhere you're delivering a service or product. And like, if you could go back and look at any project you've done and you'd be like, oh, 85% of the issues I've dealt with later are gone just from talking to like 5 people in the planning process and in the implementation. I think that's it's a win-win. It goes a long way to actually making sure you're not going to have to go back and fix a bunch of stuff that ends up being complicated. You have like a successful launch.
Yeah, that's a really good point. And it makes me think of like the Pareto principle, which basically says that 80% of your problems come from 20% of your causes. And so if you can just get into what is driving defects or what's driving problems in your programs or barriers that people are experiencing, if you took the time to do that research, you might then be able to really drill in on what's the one thing that I need to fix to drastically improve our product or our service.
Randy just said something in chat there. That is true. Yeah. One of the things when it comes to like surveys that I always like to kind of think of is you really want to do user research before you launch a survey, because the survey is going to let you kind of hone in and get greater quantitative data on a particular point. But you're not usually going to get fresh or new ideas from a survey, just because you have to structure the survey in such a way that you're asking specific questions, whether it be like, oh, on a scale of 1 to 5, how much do you like this? Or how much would you like this? Just by asking that specific question, like how much you dislike or like this, that is going to lead someone down a certain path. And when you're giving those options, what options you choose are kind of ones that you intuitively know of already. But if you do user research, maybe those options will expand based on that. So you are oftentimes you're funneling through and getting more information through a survey, but how that information gets there and what's in there often needs to be informed by the users as well, because in its isolation, it's probably not going to be enough.
It's a great point. And we do so many surveys and community action. So yeah, it's a really great point. Thank you. Do folks have any other questions, or Stig, do you have any other questions for the group?
I mean, I would definitely be really interested to see kind of the resources and what people have done with user research. I mean, I am looking for ways to kind of help governments conduct more user research themselves. So if you have tools and methodologies and experience yourself, I think that would lend a lot to kind of my work. And then also, if you are doing your own research and interviews and there's kind of questions around logistics and tools, that's kind of my specialty. So a big issue with user research is, getting in contact with people and getting people to respond or take the time to do interviews. There's like guidelines and templates and like messaging templates I have that we can kind of share and put out there. But yeah, if you have questions around logistics or kind of issues that have come up, I'd be happy to answer those questions now or later. But those are always kind of interesting areas, because it does sound like a lot of you have done your own user research.
And Stig, would you be willing to share your email? Would you be able to share your email?
Yep.
I'll put you on the spot and ask you if you're willing to share your email. But if you put that in the chat, then folks could send you some of their tools, because I really like your point about helping governments to do more of their own user research. Like when I worked at the agency, when I worked at the state, we contracted a lot of that, and that it comes at a cost, right? And we don't always have some of the cost for that expertise, but there's a lot that you can do yourself. So yeah, share your tools, share your resources, share them with Stig, share them with me here at the partnership. We'd love to see those and share those out to kind of help your peers.
And then I guess as kind of one last note, I think it's been touched on, but like user research is a great way of building empathy for your end users. And maybe all the folks in here, are already kind of part of a community that definitely considers empathy and putting users first in their mind. But that's not necessarily the case for everyone. But by kind of doing interviews and bringing stakeholders and partners and senior leadership along with you, that's a great way for them to kind of build empathy and understand decisions. Because the amount of time I've seen someone who, like, on an executive level, who doesn't care about a project, doesn't engage about a change because it's like small or low impact, but then they sit in on a session and hear someone talk about the struggles they have with a particular element or product or something, and they instantly change their mind because they've seen a face of a person and they've seen like them struggling kind of in real life with that. I think that often tells a stronger story and is more persuasive than any, like, you can say, oh, 50,000 people thought this and didn't like it. That's an abstract number. Having one person actually go through a struggle and seeing them watch that struggle can often be more of a compelling story than a huge pile of numbers.
All right, I don't see any other questions. Stig, we want to say thank you so much for lending your expertise to us and sharing your perspective. And thank you to all of you who have sat in on the call today. I do want to flag for folks before everyone jumps off, because I see numbers starting to go down. Hold on one second. So we try to do these meetings quarterly. We want them to be relevant for you as public CAPs. And you might remember one of the things we've been trying to do is keep these kind of topic focused when we come together. So we've done so much cool stuff in the last year, and I want to thank all of you for your participation throughout that. Our next meeting, we're scheduling for Thursday, August 31st from 2 to 3 p.m. Eastern, and we're hoping to spend some time on data and really want it to be less of us presenting at you, and really want to have a good conversation about, you know, kind of how is your agency using data? What challenges are you having? You know, what advice do you have for each other? Because I'll tell you, some of the best advice I ever got when I was at an agency was from my fellow agencies. You know, those insights are so valuable. So come share your best practices, connect with one another. The registration link I will put in the chat right now. And it will also be in the e-news later this week. Also wanted to flag for folks that registration for our annual convention is now open. We hope that you will join us in Atlanta, Georgia. That's August 23rd through the 25th. We have a number of awesome sessions for public CAPs. One of the sessions is focusing on how you can subcontract for impact. That will be done in partnership with CAP Law. And then we also have a session on how to work with the public CAA board, which is a topic that's kind of evergreen. I feel like we always need to be talking about our boards. So those are the two that are coming right off the top of my head, but we'll also have sessions on AI, on fundraising, on change management, whole family approach. There's just so much there. We really hope that you will join us. We also have a couple of pre-cons to the annual convention. We have a CCAP colloquium, which is an opportunity for CCAPs to come together and learn about some of the new changes in the program and receive some training. That is going to be sponsored by Deloitte, so we're looking forward to that. We also will host racial healing circles. You can register for racial healing circles at no cost. If you've never done one, it's a powerful experience and goes back to the idea of empathy that Stig was just speaking about just a moment ago. Gives us an opportunity to connect with people in a deeper way and exercise that empathy muscle. We'll also have an excellence symposium where we're going to feature community action agencies who are implementing the community action standards of excellence and sharing about their experience with that implementation and kind of best practices, tips and tricks for all of you. So we hope that you can and will join us for annual convention. And just if you have any questions, if you need anything, know that you can always reach out to us here at the partnership. Myself, my colleague Terry Bearden, really anyone on the team, we always love to hear from you. So with that, again, I want to say thank you to Stig. Thank you to US Digital Response for their great support of this event. And anyone have anything else? Any questions? Anything you want to say?
Thank you, everyone. Thank you, Mary Beth.
Yeah, thank you, Stig. Thanks. All right, guys, talk to you soon. Take care.